Good morning, everyone. My name is Therese Cory. I'm the director of the History of Philosophy Forum here at the University of Notre Dame. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you, both in person and those joining us by Zoom, to our second annual colloquium, Cognizing as Being Through the History of Philosophy. We have a very exciting lineup of speakers over the next 2 days, and it's a privilege to be here with all of you for these long-awaited discussions. Just a few words about the History of Philosophy Forum. It's now 3 years old and exists to support research on historical philosophical texts and traditions and to promote collaboration across the various boundaries that artificially hem in our scholarly activities, whether these are the boundaries of time periods like ancient and Renaissance, or intellectual traditions, Indian, European, Islamic, or geographical location, methodology, and even the boundaries of departmental homes in academia today, where a single historical philosophical text might be studied separately and very differently in departments of philosophy, theology, political science, or history of science. So at the History of Philosophy Forum, we want to promote interactions across these various boundaries that divide the history of philosophy community, with the idea that these interactions actually strengthen our specialized research by stimulating fresh perspectives. One way we do this is by running a grants program that brings international researchers here for 1 to 2 month research visits each year to work on a project with a faculty host. And we actually have 4 of this year's grant recipients on campus at once right now: Pierre Destray and Hannah Lawrence in Ancient, and Mark Textor and Stephen Howard, Mark is here, in Late Modern. We love to welcome visitors to our History of Philosophy community, so please spread the word, keep an eye on our website. We post the call for applications every year around October or November. Another of our signature activities is our annual colloquium, which takes the long view on one philosophical theme each year, investigated across different time periods and traditions. With this year's colloquium, we're kicking off a 3-year cycle on the topic of a collaborative project called Modeling the Mind in the History of Philosophy, run by myself, Denis Robichaud, Stephen Ogden, and Katharina Kraus. This project investigates how philosophers throughout history have modeled the mind and its activities, focusing on theories that challenge aspects of what is perhaps the most widespread model of mind today, namely mind as a private inner space for displaying outside objects. Our activities are organized around 3 themes. The first is cognizing as being, on the mental as a certain nature or being. And then second, life of the mind, on mind as a dynamic, growing, self-developing, living thing. And third, minds in dialogue, on the intersubjective character of mind and the private versus public character of the inner realm. As part of this project, we're putting together 3 edited volumes on these 3 topics, and the annual colloquia over the next 3 years bring together the contributors to those volumes to share their work. So this year starts off the sequence with Cognizing as Being, and look for Life of the Mind in April 2024, and Minds in Dialogue in April 2025. Now let me say something briefly about the conference theme, Cognizing as Being. I first got hooked on this topic several years back while working on Thomas Aquinas' theory of intellectual likenesses and its relationship to one of his Islamic sources, the 12th century philosopher Averroes. And I started out with the usual nice little toolkit of standard notions like representation and intentionality and abstraction. But then the deeper I got into the text, the more I started to feel like one of those babies with a shape sorting device trying to jam a plastic star into a circular hole. Nothing would fit right. So I started to wonder, what if Averroes and Aquinas were really doing something completely different? What if this were really all about a kind of conscious nature that comes to be actualized out of certain potentials by certain agents, and that grows and develops in its own way? What if Averroes and Aquinas are offering not a cognition theory in the standard sense, but a metaphysics of the nature that is conscious experience? What if cognizing is a kind of being? And with that shift, the shapes suddenly started fitting into the holes, and then the connections started surfacing. People would say things like, cognizing as being, is that like the identity of intellect and intelligibles in Plotinus? Aristotle's soul as place of forms? Margaret Cavendish's patterning? Heidegger's clearing? Is this a bit like Parmenides or Hegel or Yogacara Buddhism? And every connection pointed to something a little off the beaten track of the philosophical mainstream, often associated with panpsychism or idealism, but also often appearing without those associated claims. So what do all these theories have in common? And that's what we're here to find out. Our goal over the next 2 days is to follow the red thread of this theme of cognizing as being as a shared approach or model or tradition which crops up in very different ways and often with very different implications across the history of philosophy. Now, the difficulty is that because cognizing as being views are a bit outside the philosophical mainstream, as a scholarly community, we haven't really built a shared vocabulary and conceptual toolkit for talking about them. So if you saw our Colloquium website, you'll have seen an account of cognizing as being largely in terms of what such views stand against. The mental is not primarily a sui generis way of connecting or relating to outside things. The mental is not a sui generis realm governed by its own rules. Mental being is not less real than other beings. So taking these in reverse, I'd like to put forward the following preliminary sketch of what cognizing as being theories are committed to. First, the mental is primarily a kind of nature or being which just is conscious experience. Second, the mental and the non-mental fall under a unified metaphysics. And third, mental being is just as real as any other being, or perhaps it's even the only being. But this is just a rough sketch, and surely it fits some historical theories much better than others. So in our discussions today and tomorrow, I'd like to challenge us to think more about the following questions. What do cognizing as being theories have most fundamentally in common? What are the strengths and weaknesses of this approach? What shared vocabulary would best articulate the major insights of this tradition? And even is cognizing as being the best label for this intellectual tradition? We were already talking about this during breakfast. So I hope we can think more about all these problems, and we'll have a chance to share reflections in our final roundtable session tomorrow on Thursday. Before concluding, I want to thank our co-sponsor, the Institute for Scholarship in the Liberal Arts, as well as the Nanovic Institute for European Studies. And in addition, I want to thank my co-organizers, Katarina Kraus and Denis Robichaud, for all of their work in getting this conference together, as well as 3 very talented people who made our gathering today possible, and that's Judy Kim, our History of Philosophy coordinator. Thank you, Judy. And Claire Murphy, our communications assistant. I don't think she's here. As well as Amber Kirk from Venue ND, whom you've all met at the door. So thanks to all 3 for their tremendous work over the last few months. So now, without further ado, let me hand over the microphone to Katarina Kraus, who will introduce our first speaker.